When Toyota originally launched the BZ4X, aka the BZ4X to its friends, it was Toyota's first production EV in forever. While Toyota has been making electrified vehicles and EVs for a really long time, its first generation Toyota RAV4 EV launched before the turn of the century. Those first and second generation Toyota RAV4 EVs were produced in very limited numbers. The same with the Scion IQ EV. Very limited numbers. And don't even get me started on saying that the plug-in Prius is an EV. It's not. And Toyota leveraged its experience with hybrid electric vehicles and its reputation for building electrified vehicles when it started to produce the BZ4X. The problem was, the BZ4X was a car that was, to be kind, a little bit behind its times. It had a spec and price point that would have been good 3 or 4 years earlier, but not at the time it launched. But for 2026, Toyota went back to the drawing board. It re-engineered the BZ4X, gave it a new name for North America, the BZ, although it's still called the BZ4X in other parts of the world, and improved the drivetrain, the battery pack, the charging capabilities, and just generally the driving dynamics. A couple of weeks back, I drove the Subaru Solterra Touring XT. That's the range-topping variant of the Subaru Solterra, which is basically a Toyota BZ in disguise. But today I get to drive not the range-topping variant of the Toyota BZ, but an entry-level variant instead, the XLE Plus. It's not the cheapest variant out there, but I'm eager to see if it's actually as improved as the Subaru Solterra, or if it leaves me wanting to go to a different car. As I alluded to in the introduction, the Toyota BZ and the Subaru Solterra are linked. That's because the Subaru Solterra is made by Toyota using the same chassis and drivetrain and battery packs that you will find in the Toyota BZ lineup. And while Subaru only makes the Solterra available as an all-wheel drive model, if you buy the Toyota BZ, you can opt for either a front-wheel drive or an all-wheel drive variant. All told, there are, I think, 7 different variants of this car that you can spec. And today I'm driving the XLE Plus front-wheel drive, which is actually not the cheapest version of the BZ that you can order, but the next cheapest. So at the entry-level end of this family's lineup, you get the BZ XLE, at least you do here in North America. Then it goes to the XLE Plus, then it goes to the Limited, and then you go to the Woodland, and then you go, I think, to the Woodland Premium or the high-end variant of that. And I should note that the Woodland trim is basically the station wagon variant of the BZ. And it's really nice to get kind of a lower spec model because it really compares very nicely with my experiences with the Subaru Solterra a couple of weeks back. Inside, you'll note there are some important differences. For a start, the seats in this version are fabric and they are incredibly comfortable. I find them really robust and durable, and I actually prefer them on a hot summer day to either faux leather or leather seats. In terms of steering wheel controls and the controls that you have to the left of the steering wheel, it's exactly the same as I found in the Subaru Solterra. You have the same switch gear for the indicator stalks and the wipers. You have the same paddle shifters to allow you to adjust your regenerative braking on accelerator liftoff. But interestingly, the steering feel on this car, and remember, this is my subjective review based on my experience with the Solterra, it might be different on other vehicles, is that the steering is much more connected in this car than it felt in the Subaru Solterra. And I think that might be because of a tweak to the steering setup for the North American market, which Toyota has obviously done, but also the fact that this version of the BZ runs on 18-inch wheels with quite high-profile tyres. Now, in the last decade or so, we've seen automakers push towards ever lower profile tyres, and that impacts two things. It impacts your vehicle's range if you have an EV, but it also impacts your road handling and your road feel. And with those higher profile tyres, this car really soaks up all the bumps very nicely. And I want to preface the rest of the review with a little bit of a disclaimer here. When we at the channel get a car to review, it's expected that we're going to drive it for a whole week. We're going to put it through its paces. We're going to really get under its skin and figure out what makes the vehicle tick and what it's like to live with on a daily basis. And that involves us getting behind the wheel for a significant amount of time. I'll take it on a couple of long trips. Vi gets to drive it for 2, 3, 4 days to film all of that lovely B-roll that you are also complimentary about and tell us that we should be making video adverts for car makers. However, when we sign the documents for this vehicle, in the contract, we have to sign a contract that say, you know, we're not going to do anything dangerous with it. We're not going to take it racing or anything like that. There was a stipulation that we're only allowed to drive 300 miles in the week that we have it. 300 miles, which is ludicrously small. Now, the normal is about 700, 800, 900 miles, and that covers a normal week's worth of driving. But in this car, well, we've only been given 300 miles, and I'm sad to say that even with our best intentions, we are going to go over. Now, I don't know if that's going to mean we're going to be chased by Toyota legal or not, but I think that it's worth calling out that kind of behavior, because if we're restricted with our time behind the wheel, we can't say as much as we want to say about trying the car out. That said, already, that changed steering dynamics makes this car much, much more approachable. And while it has substantially less power at the wheels than the Subaru Solterra that we drove a couple of weeks back, it's a very smooth power delivery. The battery pack in the Toyota BZ is the same 74.7 kilowatt hour battery pack that we had in the Subaru Solterra, and that is an improvement on the 71 and a bit kilowatt hours that were in last year's model. The motor power also gets 15 kilowatts more on the front wheel drive version, which is what this is. So last year it was 150 kilowatts. This year it's 165 kilowatts. And while this car produces substantially less torque than the previous model year Toyota BZ4X, this actually has a dramatically improved sprint time. Last year's model did the stoplight sprint in about 7 seconds. This year it's 6 seconds. So it's got less torque, but it's got more power from the motor. It's got an improved battery pack, and it's got a more efficient drivetrain and inverter system, which really makes a massive difference when you are driving it. And it's also important to note that in giving us the XLE Plus, we're actually getting the most efficient variant of the Toyota BZ that is currently sold. You add an extra motor for all-wheel drive, you add extra features and extra doodads for the higher trim variants, and the car gets heavier and it becomes less efficient. And driving around these rural roads west of Portland, this feels effortless to drive. And I'm getting a feeling, a vibe that reminds me very much of the earlier Toyota Prii, the second generation, which I owned 3 of, and I was a big fan of. Like the Subaru Solterra we reviewed a couple of weeks ago, you get dual inductive phone chargers down here in the center console. You also get this quite soft but well-made interior trim. It doesn't feel very hollow or plasticky, which was something I was worried about for the interior of this car. That said, because it's based on the same platform as the Subaru Solterra, it has the same niggles. The steering wheel position is just so weird. The steering wheel right now is at its highest and its most furthest out, and it still feels like I'm not able to quite get the steering wheel where I want it to be, and I'm not able to get my legs where I want them to be. The other thing you'll notice in this variant of the Toyota BZ is that it doesn't have that massive panoramic glass sunroof that we had in the Solterra, but in the XLE Plus, you get this covered roof, and it makes the interior feel a little bit more cozy. Some people may find it a little claustrophobic, but actually I really like it, especially on a hot summer day like we've got today. The instrument cluster on this is pretty much the same as we had in the Subaru Solterra, a few tweaks here and there, but of course there are some differences between these vehicles that are worth noting. And the first thing that's worth noting is that this car, because it's the front-wheel drive variant, doesn't have the same mode switches that we found in the Solterra, but what you do get is a button to allow you to switch between eco and regular driving mode. I'm currently in the regular drive mode. I've tweaked my regenerative lift-off to a pretty high setting, so I can lift my foot off the go pedal and the car slows down quite nicely. Not super quickly. I mean, it's not the harshest regenerative braking I've ever experienced. And it reminds me actually of the regenerative braking, again, from some of those earlier Prius models in B mode. The other thing that's important to note here is that you get a snow button. It modifies your accelerator input to make it harder for you to spin your wheels. And it's been a feature in Toyota EVs for more than 25 years. The original Toyota RAV4 EV, remember I used to own one, didn't come as standard with a snow mode, but you could get a snow mode switch to add to it, and in its home market of Japan, it did come with the snow mode button as standard, and it was great fun to drive. Because this is a lower priced version of the BZ, there's not a whole lot of advanced technology getting in the way of your driving, and most of the features on this vehicle are manual. That said, you do have adaptive cruise control, you do have lane keep assist, and you do have all of these buttons that I complained about in the Subaru Solterra review. One thing that appears missing though is the preconditioning for the charging system. Just like the Subaru Solterra, you can use a Tesla J3400 charging station, or NACS. Some of you were upset recently that I used NACS rather than J3400, so I'm going to try really hard to use both of those terms in tandem in future reviews. But yes, this is a NACS charging inlet on this vehicle. That means you can use Tesla superchargers or other J3400 charging stations that have the Tesla style inlet on them. You can obviously use a NACS to CCS adapter, so you can use the older CCS Type 1 charging stations. And of course, if you're buying this car in Europe, it will just come with the CCS Type 2 inlet instead of NACS, because NACS is not a thing in Europe. Of course, also in Japan, you will get this car with two charge ports, one for CHAdeMO, which is the standard fast charging system in Japan, and on the other side you'll get a J1772 inlet. So it's a bit complicated, but back to the preconditioning of the battery pack. Like the Subaru Solterra, this car has a battery preconditioning function. Now, on this system here, there is a button. You can turn it on to turn the preconditioning on. And I think it works the same as the Subaru Solterra. However, I have been reading up on this vehicle, and there's been some confusion in the Toyota BZ forums about exactly how this works. And some people say it doesn't work the same as you get in the Subaru Solterra, even though these vehicles are built on a shared platform. The other thing that's important to note is that unlike the Subaru Solterra, you can just hit the button and have the car prepare itself for fast charging. I believe in the BZ, you have to have the navigation subscription service turned on in order to have the car automatically engage preconditioning if you are on a route that involves a fast charger. And while you can use Apple CarPlay with this or Android Auto, if you're using Apple Maps or Google Maps to set your destination, I do not believe that the preconditioning activates. Again, this is based on the research that I've been doing. I've already told you that we've had limited seat time in this vehicle, so if I am wrong, please correct me in the comments. Now, I know I've already talked about the fact that this has a solid roof, but I think the solid roof makes this car much quieter and more pleasant to be in, and I think it would be a great place for road tripping with a family. And while I don't think this car is one that you would primarily buy for road tripping, I think it's capable of that. On paper, Toyota says that this variant of the BZ can do 314 miles on the EPA test cycle. What's that, about 500 and some kilometers? But I believe that you would be safer to target somewhere between 250 and 270 miles for long distance road trips. Why am I bringing up the difference between its EPA range and what I think it's capable of in the real world? Well, it's just a bit of a reminder to people considering buying one of these that the difference between what a car says it can get on an EPA test cycle versus what it can achieve in the real world are notably different. And that's true for pretty much every EV on the market today. And given the fact that these cars are proving incredibly popular with first-time EV buyers, I'd be remiss not to remind you of that fact. And to finish, I want to acknowledge that Toyota has been very clever with its marketing for EVs. So for a quarter of a century, Toyota has been synonymous with hybrid vehicles, electrified hybrid vehicles. And it's really worked on the conflation of electric and hybrid. And so a lot of people think about electric vehicles and they think about Toyota. And because they do that, even though Toyota hasn't made a huge number of EVs to date, when they're looking for an electric vehicle, if they're not EV enthusiasts, if they don't know the market, they instinctively go to their local Toyota dealer because Toyota makes EVs. And because Toyota hasn't really delineated between hybrid electric vehicle and battery electric vehicle, despite years of trying to convince customers that EVs are bad and hybrids are good, now that Toyota is actually making a really good electric vehicle, everyone is just flocking to Toyota. And based on this very short time I've had behind the wheel, I get it. This is a car that is, well, it's the Toyota Camry of EVs. It's a vehicle that is designed for people to just get in and drive. You don't need to understand all the buzzwords to use it. That's why in the US and Canada, it's got an X. It's designed to just rock up to what most people think of when they think of charging, a Tesla supercharger, and plug in. I've had all too short a time with this car, and that's just the nature of the game, right? We get these vehicles for a week. Vi gets the car for 3 or 4 days to film B-roll. I get to drive it for a couple of days this time around just because of the way things have worked. I really have had a very limited time behind the wheel. But because I'd driven the Solterra Touring XT, I didn't feel that I would be approaching this car completely unaware of what it offered. What I will admit though, when I came into this review, was that I expected this to be the Solterra, but not as good. And what I've learned from the time I've had with this car is that it's as good as the Solterra EV in a different way. The Solterra EV is designed to be your adventure-loving car. It's a car that is okay in the town, okay in suburbia, and okay on rural dirt tracks. But it's such an accomplished car for what you need. Most people don't need a really powerful EV. Most people just want a car that will make sure that they can clock in on time Monday to Friday, that can take family members or kids to events, that can navigate through the city without making you feel tired, that can easily park, that has great steering, that isn't going to get you into trouble. And I say this without any superfluousness. This is a good car. It's a better car than I thought it would be. As I said on my drive, it reminds me of those second generation, third generation Toyota Prius models. It just muscles in, gets the job done, and then you get out of the car and you go on with your day. This is not a car for people who enjoy driving for driving's sake. This is a car for people who need a tool to get them from A to B with as least fuss as possible. The niggles I have with this car are exactly the same as the niggles that I had with the Subaru Solterra. It nags you a lot. There are many bings and bongs, and I didn't spend a huge amount of time in this review discussing it because, well, go watch the Solterra review if you want to know more about them. Yes, you have to subscribe to Navigation as a Service, but if you do, you get plug and charge as standard. You also get ambient interior lighting, which Toyota is very proud of and is very eager to point out isn't offered on the Solterra EV. And if you get this particular variant of the BZ, you actually get a slightly larger luggage space with all of the seats up, because there's not a massive audio system in the sub-boot area. But other than that, it's just a case of picking. Do you want the Toyota badge and front-wheel drive and a little more money in your pocket? Or do you want the Subaru variant? Or if you're feeling really flush, the Lexus model. This is a marked improvement on the 2025 Toyota BZ4X. It doesn't feel like the same car, even though essentially it is. Those tweaks to the battery pack, to the drivetrain, to the responsiveness, to the steering have all made a massive difference. And normally, if someone asked me what EV they should buy, I would generally encourage them to buy a used model rather than a new one. But because the difference between the previous generation and this is so massive, if you are genuinely interested in a no-frills, low-cost EV, the Toyota BZ might be for you. And yes, low cost is subjective. It starts at around 37 grand, and this one as configured is pushing 40. That is out of the price range for many people. It would be out of the price range for me, if I'm completely honest, at this point in my life. But if you have the cash, you have the wherewithal, and either you want to lease or outright buy, and you don't want fancy technology, you don't want gobs of power that you're not going to use, or a battery pack that is larger than your bladder. It's a pretty good car.